Alliance for Social Justice sort of discussion series, educational discussion series. We'll be having these every Thursday. This one, of course, is at 10 a.m. this morning, and we're going to do a watch party later for those who couldn't attend. But in the future, we're going to start having them during lunchtime, and we hope that folks can join us. This morning. Oh, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Fallon McClure. I am the Executive Director of Georgia Alliance for Social Justice. I have taken over from Janelle Green. So this is an exciting time. We are going to be doing some new exciting things. And don't worry, Janelle isn't going anywhere. She's just on the board. And so she'll still be involved in Georgia Alliance. So we just thank all of y'all for being here, and just stay tuned for new events and activities and announcements. We have a lot of great things coming up soon. And this morning, I am honored to have, for our very first discussion, Christopher Bruce with the ACLU of Georgia. He is the policy director, and he's going to tell us all about the 2021 legislative session, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the next steps that we can take to fight back against all these things that have happened during the session. I know we've been like watching in shock and horror, to be honest. And so now we have an opportunity to hear about what we can do. I know we've been watching lawsuits, there's been protests, but I'm excited to see how on the individual level we can get involved in like what we can do to take Georgia back. And so I will turn it over to Chris. Thank you for being here.
Executive Director Fallon McClure. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invite. You know, our friendship goes back to when I started in the social justice game. Actually, you brought me on for our first reason. So greatly appreciate all that you do, and very happy to see you in this position altogether. Look, I'm going to go and I'm going to breeze through these slides, give you the good, the bad, and the ugly, so I can take questions, because I prefer that more. It's always better to get more of an interaction than just read through what legislation passed or what didn't pass. So let's go ahead, let's get started. I'm gonna share my screen real fast. Here we go, ACLU of Georgia. This is a recap that we've done for a few other presentations. I kind of specialized it just for this one. So there's gonna be a few other changes that are happening. Let's go to the next screen. ACLU of Georgia, if you don't know, we're an organization that really focuses on protecting your civil rights and civil liberties. I'm not even going through all this. We did have a legislative agenda though. And within that legislative agenda, we know that legislature started on January 11th. Oh my God, it seems so long ago. And it always ends around the end of March or early April. This year it ended March 31st. You also have a concept called crossover day. Bills have to be presented on the 28th legislative day. I'll get into the difference between legislative days and not. So typically you have 3 really big days: first day of session, crossover day, and sine die, which is the 40th legislative day and the last day for legislative session. And then after that, you have a 40-day period for the governor to either sign bills, veto bills, or not sign bills, and they automatically come into law. All the legislative work plans are not 40 days consecutively. You know that legislative days are days by the legislature, so they can pick a Monday, Wednesday, and a Friday. The Tuesdays and Thursdays can be committee days. So that's why, even though it's 40 days, it spans from January to March or April, typically. We're talking about what sine die is, last day of session. What's really important is you'll hear a lot of comments about what is dead and what is alive when it comes to bills, like, oh, we defeated this bill, oh, it's dead, or anything else. Our legislature is a biennial legislature, which means that it goes for 2 years. This is the first year, excuse me, this was the first year of the biennial legislature, 2021. That means our legislature really doesn't end until 2022. So all those bills that you're talking about were not passed by the Legislative Assembly. They are still alive. They could come back at any time and be passed during the 2022 legislative session. So don't think that we're out of the woods just because something didn't pass or something did pass. Let's jump right into the legislation. I love to start off with voting rights. because we need to really go into what happened and what are we left with. Giving you a little bit of background, there are about 7.6 million people registered in the state of Georgia. This looks into the voting numbers that we had in November and January 5th. So we're really looking at over 9 million votes that have been cast between those two elections. Historical when it comes to Georgia, not just Georgia, within the South with the per ratio voting of any state down here. Georgia really outperformed itself. So as you can imagine, it was very surprising to see all these voter restriction bills instead of more voter access bills. But when you deal with voting, you normally deal with about 3 pillars that anchor it. 1 is voter registration. 2 is access to your ballot. That deals with your early in-person voting, absentee by mail voting, and election day voting. And 3, ballot counting. That's 4th would be elections administration, but that's a completely different horse within itself. So what did we do this year? Well, we tracked about 113 election bills. That's just election bills. To put that in perspective, you normally have about 7 or 8 election bills a year. 113 was ridiculous. Bills that expanded access to the ballot, this is about 15 plus. This is according to our rubric. Bills that restricted ballot access for Georgians, you had over 45. That's where you heard things about HB 531, Senate Bill 241, Senate Bill 202, which is the one that passed. So what really happened within this? We advocated for expanding access and testified at the majority of hearings which were allowed on election bills. There was a lot of bills that they didn't even allow public comment on. So over a dozen times, you actually had an ACLU representative talking for election bills. So let's look at the bills that didn't go through. Senate Bill 241, which would have repealed no excuse absent balloting by limiting eligibility to 7 enumerated excuses. So if Senate Bill 241, something that y'all had heard about a few times, didn't pass, but if it had passed, you had a very limited window of what you could use for absentee ballots. So all those numbers I was talking about before about Georgia breaking records, you wouldn't have gotten those again. But again, Senate Bill 241, since this is a biennial legislature, it's still alive and it could still pass. Removing all optional voting on weekend voting days, that's HB 531. That passed the House, but again, it's still alive. Ending automatic voter registration. The number of voters who actually, the number of people who are actually registered to vote has been phenomenal when it comes to nonprofit registering them, going into the communities, educating people. But by far, the highest amount of people who are registered to vote comes for our DMV, which has had over 1 million people registered to vote. Senate Bill 69 would have stopped that. And if you would have stopped that, the number of people who are registered to vote in the state of Georgia would have plummeted, or it wouldn't be kept up at the same rate that it is right now. Senate Bill 69, however, is still alive and could still pass. That is something that we should always be worried about. Didn't get enough press, but it's something that should be pulled automatically. And requiring photo ID copies of ID for all absentee voters. Another thing that would practically kill absentee ballots. And getting rid of drop boxes in all circumstances. Senate Bill 241. We'll talk about Senate Bill 202 and how that happened. Here are some clips about testimonies that happened. We're not going to go into that. So what are we left with? Senate Bill 202 was the bill that actually signed into law. Senate Bill 202 started off as a 2-page bill that just dealt with requiring absentee ballot request forms by Chairman Burns. We were actually going to amend it and say, instead of you getting fined for making a request for an absentee ballot application, we're going to say you just get a warning. Cool, very simple bill. But this is what happens in your legislature. They took this innocent looking 2-page bill and turned it into a 98-page monstrosity. And it passed both chambers on Thursday, March 25th, and the governor signed it into law that same exact day. There's plenty of experienced legislators who've never seen this process before. You know why? Because they didn't want the heat from the backlash of signing Senate Bill 202. But they got it anyway. So the things that have happened the most is, what are we dealing with Senate Bill 202 in the top 6 issues? Well, you have the state take over a county election. It's not being talked about much, but it actually is probably the most concerning thing. If you can have the state or the SEB come into your county election board and tell it what it can and cannot do, and just completely shut down polling precincts at its own will, well, not sending out absentee ballots or anything else, then you can actually really influence the election altogether. Really be concerned about the state takeover election. Dramatically restricts absentee by mail voting. This is an attack on absentee voting and making your runoffs virtually impossible to administer by moving them from 28 days after the general election. 28 days runoff. The reason why this is so concerning is because if you have that, if you have a runoff, if you have other votes that are being counted, like a recount, you're not going to have time to do a recount and administer another election at the same time. Very concerning about how this is actually going to play in within the elections, in the future elections. What we've heard all across the country is talking about line warming bans. This is where you cannot give refreshments to your neighbors who are waiting in line. It's very concerning within itself. Disenfranchising out of precinct voters. Before, if you did not vote within your precinct, but still voted within your county on election day, your vote counted. It was just a few of your, a few of the elected officials, a few of the people who are running for office would be taken out. So for example, if I'm in DeKalb County and I'm in a precinct at a church, but I can't make it in time, and I go to a precinct at a school, I would have to vote provisional ballot. Everything that's within that provisional ballot that has other people who are not my elected officials, who don't represent me, I can't vote for them. Like, it gets thrown out. But the people that do, that are on the state level, those get counted. Or my county commissioner is still within that district. That still gets counted. This bill, Senate Bill 202, again, something else that people are talking about, this throws that all the way out altogether. If you do not vote in your polling precinct on election day, your ballot is practically null and void. Something very concerning, where you had tens of thousands of people actually doing this. So again, another way of decreasing access to the ballot and taking away your right to vote. There is, go ahead.
There was a quick question in the chat. It said, what day did 202 get presented as a two-page bill?
Oh, that's a good question. So I don't know. I'll have to look back at that because I remember testifying on that bill too. I wouldn't be on that. It had to be, 202 was 2 weeks before it morphed into something else. It was a part of a lot of other package bills. But again, it was Chairman Burns's bill altogether. A very innocent looking, still voter restriction type of bill because it limits the amount of people who can actually access ballot applications, which is concerning for us because we think that's a First Amendment issue. However, talking to the chairman, he was open to amending it. We didn't know that it was going to be hijacked by Chairman Fleming. If it was hijacked, I don't know what happened behind the scenes. We just know that it became the worst bill down at the Georgia legislature. So I'll get back to you about the exact date, but I think it was 2 weeks before the election. I remember reading it, testifying on it when it was actually introduced. So thanks for that, Fallon. I'm not checking the chat, so yeah, just interrupt me whenever you can. The other thing that people have been talking about all the time is the county budget windfalls that are going to happen. There's a lot of other things about county administration for your board of elections that is not being funded by the state, but is in this law. Your counties are going to pay for this, which means you're going to have to pay for it. Taxes are they're going to have to figure out another way of paying for these new types of justification, including security paper and a lot of other issues that we really don't even know. Why? Because we don't have a fiscal note. And the reason why we don't have a fiscal note is because we knew that it was going to cost so much that it was going to be hard to push this through or justify it. Let's jump into the other bills too. Senate Bill 171. Senate Bill 171 was very concerning to us altogether because this was upping the penalties for unlawful assembly and making lawful assemblies harder to conduct altogether. It didn't get that much press, but it was very concerning. This is a slap in the face for any and every Black Lives Matter protest that ever happened down in 2020 and in 2016, and it's happening right now. They are going to take away your First Amendment right to freedom of assembly and petitioning the government altogether. This was done by Senator Randy Robinson. And it had a plethora of other things, such as denied state employee benefits to anyone convicted of a lawful assembly. People could be charged under the RICO statute, which is typically an organized gang statute, and instituting burdensome permits to conduct a protest. Horrible bill, and it died. So we testified, as long as a coalition of other people, we testified to Senate Bill 171, got kicked out, only to come back in House Bill 289. So when you think you defeat a bill, a lot of times that does not happen. So there was an anti-defund the police bill that was happening that we testified against, watered it down to, if you, and I will get into anti-defund the police. After that, I went over to testify on Senate Bill 202. I was getting text messages from elected officials to come back because they hijacked, what I said hijacked, just like with Senate Bill 202, they hijacked House Bill 289 and put all the bad things in Senate Bill 171 into House Bill 289. However, by the time I moved from the Capitol to the other building, I could not get it back in time. Those are the type of dirty tricks that they do. As much as we oppose it, it did not pass this legislative session, but it only needs to pass the Senate right now. And if it passes the Senate, then it can get passed the House again and goes to the governor's desk. So again, we're in a biennial legislature, still first year. House Bill 289 is still alive. Let's make sure it doesn't pass. Religious exemptions during the state of emergencies. In all of their wonder and glamour, your Georgia elected officials said, hey, you know what would be a good idea? If people ignored the governor's restrictions when it comes to COVID-19 or any other state of emergency, and let people do whatever they want. If it was a plague, a pandemic, a hurricane, so it's not just COVID-19, it could be any state of emergency, but they would still allow religious services to continue to go on even during these natural disasters or any other disasters happening. We're against that because people's lives are going to be at stake. That's really what it comes down to. There's a reason why we call things state of emergencies. This is one of those situations where it's saying, well, the government's going a little bit too far, giving a little bit too much to people who may not know what they're doing. It could really cost people's lives. Testified, worked with committee members, worked with them. The bill actually got worse, which is why we were just like an all-out assault. We need to kill the bill. The bill's still not dead though. It could still come back next year and be passed. Senate Bill 226, censorship in public schools. These are the type of bills that you really get into the minutia of. This is why voting, which is the number one priority for us, because we know that it goes into all these other bills. But people weren't talking about Senate Bill 226 because this would force school administrations who field complaints from parents about materials that are not in fact harmful to minors to apply to a complex standard to complaints. This bill originally started off with carrying a jail sentence for librarians who had certain books in their libraries in school districts or in libraries altogether in your public community library. Horrible bill. Like, it's 2021 and people are still restricting your access to information in books. Ridiculous. This failed to pass the House and the Senate by sine die, but again, it's still a lie. Be careful about Senate Bill 226. If that actually passes, then we just taken a huge step backwards. House Bill 1 is a bill that I've been fighting with literally since I became a lobbyist down at the legislature, since 2017. It just comes back in different forms every year. But it's supposed to protect student groups that discriminate based on religious, political, or ideological beliefs. It failed to pass the House by crossover day. So hopefully that's dead altogether. House Bill 1, you will have progressive groups and very conservative groups actually working to some sort of standard of belief within it. A lot of this really goes into student groups discriminating against LGBTQ individuals, people based on their gender or political ideological beliefs, and schools not being able to take their funding for blatant discrimination. House Bill 1 did not pass this year. It didn't pass last year. It didn't pass the year before that, but it keeps coming back. It's something that you should definitely be concerned about. LGBTQ bills, luckily, none of them passed this year. Thank God. House Bill 372 and Senate Bill 226, restricting the single gender athletic event. This was called Save Our Girls Sports Act. Crazy, like I can't even make this stuff up. Luckily, that didn't pass. There was an unsuccessful attempt to sneak in an anti-trans bill language into another Senate bill by Sonny Dye. That didn't pass. Criminal legal system and bills. House Bill 479, the repeal of citizens' arrest. The McMichaels, who use citizens' arrest as their affirmative defense for murdering Ahmaud Arbery, this would repeal citizens' arrest. Georgia is the first state in the entire United States to repeal citizens' arrest. Repealing citizens' arrest is completely safe, despite what other people may say, because you have so many other laws on the books which protect your right to defense and property in other situations. Citizens' arrest has been used since the Civil War for lynch mobs and terrorizing Black people altogether, not only in this state, but plenty of other states. So Georgia is actually leading the way within doing this. We have a lot of other bills that are on the books that need to be done, but House Bill 479 passed almost unanimously from both House and Senate, and now it's on the governor's desk right now. I expect it to be signed. What's up?
I have another question. Did are House Bill 372 and Senate Bill 266 still alive?
Yes, these bills are still alive. Again, this is a biennial legislature. These bills could come up at any time during the 2022 legislative session and still be passed, which, if you haven't heard, 2022 is an election year where we will be voting on governor and other state offices. So 2022 is one of those crazy wild years where you have some of the most radical legislations where people are trying to say, I'm really a Republican or I'm really a Democrat. House Bill 372 and Senate Bill 266 are one of those what we call marker pieces of legislation of determining who really is one of those types of people. You should be very concerned about House Bill 372 and Senate Bill 266. It should be killed altogether. People should take their names off of this bill. Is that going to happen? No, but we got to make sure that it does not pass through committees to actually make it happen.
Hey, yeah, I just wanted to say, so like I'm a transgender woman, and I want to say thank you so much for fighting so hard for our rights. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, and I definitely can't take all the credit. Georgia Equality definitely led within the effort. The bill was so bad that we actually brought in our national office and staff attorneys to actually come in. So yes, as always, LGBTQ rights is always a #1 issue for us. So yes, we did everything that we can, but it is still alive. I'm not going to lie about it. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. We got to make sure that it does not pass this legislative session, and it could have. I'll be honest with you there. So be very aware of it. Expanding access to early probation termination. This is Senate Bill 105. We actually supported this bill. As you can see, most of the bills down here, we actually opposed. This bill is actually a Republican bill that we supported, and it passed. This is revising the procedure and timeline for termination of probation. Georgia has some of the longest probation time periods in the entire nation, which is why you have so many people who are under governmental control. Georgia is #1 when it comes to people being under government control or oversight due to some sort of criminal activity. This would provide other options for early termination for people who serve years of probation. People can get 10, 15, 20 years for probation, which means that they would still be within the system, and just one little slip up by the government standards, not by reality, could be back into the system. Luckily, Senate Bill 105 passed, and hopefully the governor signs it. Senate Bill 115. Oh, this is again by Senator Randy Robertson. This is a bill. This is why I'm glad that this didn't pass, because it didn't get enough action down at the legislature either. You remember everything that's happening right now with Dante Wright, George Floyd, and everything. Again, out of all the wisdom of your Georgia General Assembly, they said, well, the police are doing everything fine. Why don't we teach people how to behave when interacting with the police, instead of teaching the police to stop shooting Black and brown people? That's what Senate Bill 115 was basically trying to do. It's trying to teach people how to behave when the police stop them. Completely ridiculous altogether. So we, the reason why I'm laughing is because this is such a ridiculous bill that we got railroaded on, of saying, if you go ahead, simplest amendment to it, if you actually included in there saying that the police have to apprise the individual, or this instruction course actually teaches people their constitutional rights when being stopped by the police, we'll be for it. Because again, we're all for the Constitution. They scoffed. They were like, why would we teach people their constitutional rights in a instructional course while being stopped by the police? Well, you're for the Constitution, you should be for it. Anyway, so we launched an all-out effort to kill Senate Bill 115. Again, it's not dead. It failed to pass the legislature by sign and die. But these are the type of issues that we really monitor when nobody else is looking. The anti-defund the police bill, House Bill 286. So again, everybody's calling for defund the police. What does your legislature do? They pass an anti-defund the police bill, which says you cannot take a certain amount of funding from the police department within a year in their budget. Well, what happened with this bill? It was really bad. It was done by Representative Houston Gaines out of Athens. And he said it was because Athens was contemplating, didn't pass, contemplating reducing the police budget by 50% and putting it into community services, which Athens should be able to do, of saying we need more wraparound services, mental health services, instead of having an armed response to everything. This bill stopped that. Luckily, the bill was watered down so much that it really doesn't matter. So that basically means that even though the bill passed, the bill really has no effect, because it says as long as you have a public hearing on budgets and allowing the public to speak upon it, then you can still reduce the police budget. Well, cities and counties do this anyway. So the bill is more of a political tool, as a slap in the face again, for Black Lives Matter protesters, saying that we can do other things with our budgets as far as defund the police. So they got a political win out of it. We got a win in making sure that people really did not have an anti-defund the police bill.
And I just want to pop in for a second, Chris, to let everyone know that our next Decode the Debate series on April 29th will be all about defund. We'll have Tiffany Roberts from the Southern Center for Human Rights and Mariah Parker from the Athens Clark County City Council, where, of course, they were trying to target with this, to talk all about the bill and defund generally, and sort of like break down the issues around defund and how folks are trying to be so intentionally obtuse in explaining what it does and doesn't do.
I love Mariah. I'm gonna have to tune in myself. She's so great. What else do we have going on? The fight continues. Like I said, all these bills are happening. I'm still upset from 2018 with still passing House Bill 481, which was the abortion ban bill. I don't think that we should ever forget what the Georgia General Assembly did that with the attack on people when it said who can and cannot have children, and the way that they're putting that together. But they still continue to do this stuff. So House Bill 382 would have repealed funding crisis pregnancy centers. These are fake clinics that give out false information, which is very dangerous when it comes to reproductive rights. Unfortunately, it didn't cross over. And House Bill 72 will require the Department of Community Health to allow mothers giving birth to newborns to retain medical eligibility for 1 year postpartum. This is extending what it was before. Unfortunately, this didn't cross over. Again, it's still alive, these are the bills that we need to push through to make sure that reproductive freedom is safe and solid in the state of Georgia. House Bill 96, the men's rights activist bill. It was pushing a bill to abusers to get more contact with their victims and children. Luckily, this is not crossover because it is a ridiculous bill altogether. Again, still a lot, so it still could come back, especially during the election year, legislative year. House Bill 146, paying for paternity leave for eligible state employees and eligible local board of education employees too. It passed the House and the Senate, so we'll see if that actually gets signed by the governor. We did a lot of advocacy efforts as far as phone calls, emails, stuff like that. We don't have to worry about that. We'll go into the question situation, so which is what I love to do. So please go ahead. Let's talk about it. Hope you enjoyed the presentation, by the way.
Thank you so much, Chris. I know that there's always a lot of bills and a lot of things coming at you. So I'm glad we have, the significant amount of time now to go through questions. And I want to say, I think, was that Miranda that had just came off mute? I'm sorry if you were about to ask a question right when I was, but happy to, this is an open debate and dialogue, and for Chris to answer. And also if there's something that I know we're having a topic coming up soon, I'm happy to answer questions as well.
I publish a weekly advocacy newsletter for my grassroots organization in Middle Georgia. And what is the best way for me to find out the bills that are either pre-filed or following the ones that you talked about today? All those are part of our organization's core principles. So what's the best way for me to find out this information so I can get it out in a timely manner for our advocacy group?
Perfect, Glenn. So you can get every bill if you Google Georgia General Assembly, they publish the bills every day.
Right.
As far as first readers and everything else. That's boring. You don't want to look at all those. You can also look at other groups like ACLU saying, well, these are the bills that we're going to follow. And if you go to acluga.org and you go to legislative tracker, we have all those bills on our website to show you which bills we're looking at, why we're looking at them, do we oppose them or do we support them. If you need any more help with that, you can email me at political@acluga.org. Happy to do that. We really want to get the most amount of information out to as many people as possible.
Yeah, because I do go to the Georgia General Assembly, but half the time I'm not a lawyer. I can't read that legalese, so I'm having to depend on myself trying to figure out what the bill actually means. Like you said, that one that was the protect men's rights, something or other, or
Senate Bill 96, right?
Save our girls, sports, something. It'll be entitled that, but it means the absolute opposite. And it's having to wade through everything makes it difficult.
And
Glenn, I am a lawyer.
I'm a lawyer too. I was going to say the same thing. We are both lawyers and still struggle through this on a daily basis. So
right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Chris, if you could tell us maybe some of the steps that are being taken about the voting rights bills, because there's lawsuits, and why are there so many lawsuits from so many different groups? Like why they didn't do these lawsuits just all get together and do one, and what you think perhaps is going to happen with those. Also, we have municipal elections coming up. Do you think that there will be injunctions and stuff for the lawsuits, or will the municipal elections be testing grounds for these new voter access repeals or whatever, however we want to frame it? I'm just curious to see your thoughts on that, or to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, those are great questions, Fallon. So let me start with your first one about next steps with these voting bills. Again, you had really only one voting bill that passed, and that was Senate Bill 202, which was signed into law the same day. That's the one that has all those other lawsuits. But remember at the beginning, I said there are 113 election law bills, which means that if only one bill passed, there's 112 bills that are still active at the legislature. And over 60 of them are restricting voting access. So within that, in 2022, you have to be very aware that you may get another bill that's going to restrict voting access. We need to make sure those do not pass at all. So continue up the heat and the pressure on elected officials to say, no, we're not going to accept another Senate Bill 202. House Bill 531 and Senate Bill 241 are still very active and alive. And those other bills I was talking about. So those are the next steps with those bills altogether. When it comes to Senate Bill 202 and why do you have different coalitions doing different types of lawsuits? Well, it's because a lot of those lawsuits are doing different things. So some lawsuits are attacking, remember, Senate Bill 202 is an omnibus bill. So that is a complete voter suppression bill in so many different ways. It would be almost impossible to attack the entire bill. And if you ever hear it from Leader Dugan, they purposely drafted so it can be severable, which means that a piece of the bill could be struck down, but not the whole bill. And that's what these coalition groups did. They divided up the work and said, well, we're going to go ahead and attack the drop box access. We're going to go ahead and attack the early voting access. We're going to attack different pieces of that bill altogether. So each group is specifically focusing on a different part of the bill. Nothing's attacking the entire Senate Bill 202 by itself. So you have to look at those groups and which groups are actually, what part of the bills they're actually attacking. Is this going to go into effect by the municipal elections? A lot of this is not going to have a bearing on the municipal elections, and some of it will. So we don't know what time the lawsuits will actually be done. I really don't know. If I did, I'd probably get paid a lot more money to actually predict these types of things. But those are really good questions. But I'm glad that you brought that up, Fallon. It seems like Georgia has voting fatigue, right? If you lived actually in the city of Atlanta, you would have voted about 7 times within this past year. 7. It's ridiculous. And now you have a municipal election that's coming up. And most of the state is going through municipal elections too that are happening in November. That's why you need to look into other options such as ranked choice voting. We haven't come up with a stance on ranked choice voting, but it will cut down on the number of elections that we actually do have. Just be very aware that in your city or your county, you probably do have an election coming up in 2021, and you have a new way of voting altogether. If you use the drop box last year, like I did, and you just decided on filling out the paperwork and putting in there a very safe way to do it while you have a global pandemic that's killing hundreds of thousands of people, you can't do that anymore. You have to go within the polling precinct and drop it off within there, which makes no sense at all because that was the whole point of drop boxes in the first place. So just know that you're going to have to educate yourself on the new ways of voting, which is something that I'm really pushing for the ACLU to do. We need to go into the communities, show them the ramifications of Senate Bill 202, and let them know this is the new way that you're going to have to vote compared to what was being done in 2000.
And I assume so when y'all get these programs together and send them, that obviously they'll be happening before November, but there's just so much confusion around what we're going to do or not be able to do. And so we would love for you to, once that's there, come back and share, and we can, share with our members and stuff as well, because there's just so much also misinformation around all of this. And it's like, we don't quite know where to turn. So appreciate that y'all are putting together a program to like break down how we can do things. And it's just crazy how it keeps changing. It's like, it seems like it changes almost every election, right? Oh, we just got drop boxes. These are cool. Okay, well, all these people voted because it was a pandemic and now we don't have drop boxes, so.
Yeah, and take it away. And love to work with you on that too, Fallon. So thank you for that. We'll definitely accept that invitation. I'm just a phone call away. And but it's up to us to really educate the community on the new ways of voting. It's within my wish and my goal, my desire that we had a record turnout in November. We had a record turnout January 5th. We need to have another record turnout this upcoming municipal elections, and especially in 2022. So in spite of Senate Bill 202 passing, we can organize as a community and fight voter suppression together. So don't give them talking points of saying, oh, it's not a voter suppression bill, because it is literally a voter suppression bill. But we can all come together and we can fight back and say we can overcome.
Is there, I'm not clear on what the voter ID requirement will be. I know you have to put a number on an absentee ballot request. Are voter IDs issued by boards of elections going to have an ID number on them? I don't know what they look like. I have a driver's license, so I don't really worry about that. But I know we have a lot of people in Macon who don't have cars, don't have driver's licenses, and we want to make sure that we get proper ID in their hands so they can vote absentee if they want.
Right. And again, absentee ballot, very safe way to vote during a global pandemic. I can't emphasize that enough. So remember the numbers I said before. You have over 7.6 million Georgians who are registered to vote in the state of Georgia. 98% of them have a driver's license. 98% of them. So everybody's like, well, it's only 2% of people that don't have driver's license. Well, that 2% of 7.6 million is over 200,000 people. And if you recall, Biden only won the state by 11,000 votes. Warnock won his election by about 90,000 votes. 200,000 is a lot of voters who could be disenfranchised. So your ID required, according to the bill, it has to be a government issued ID. So that includes passports. It can be a military ID. It can be a student ID where it deals with your student number, as long as you're coming from a state school. So like Morehouse and Spelman are not state schools, they're private schools. You can't use that, but you could use one from Georgia State. So those are the type of things, which makes no sense at all either. The problem with all that is the Secretary of State is not ready for that either. So yeah, if you want to put your passport on there, how is the Secretary of State going to verify that? So there's a lot of other questions that need to be worked out altogether in this very rushed through bill that nobody really looked at the ramifications of. But that goes along with everything else I was saying. It is voter suppression because now those 200,000 people without driver's license have to think of a new way of voting. And we have to come up with ways to help them being able to vote too. So either coming up with another form of ID, but you can get a free ID from the state to go vote. However, the individuals who typically are in this situation do not have the means or the transportation to get that free ID, or don't even know the information to get that ID in the first place.
Right. And in the past, when I worked with folks to help get their IDs, like I spent some time where that is all that we did. We would help pay for folks' birth certificates and get all the documentation. To get the free ID at the Board of Election, you still need certain documentations. And a lot of times, those are some of the documentations that folks are missing that keep them from getting a regular state issued ID. So it becomes a circular process in the sense of like, yes, the Board of Elections is supposed to give that free ID. That free ID will comply with the requirements for the absentee voting. You're asking about like the number and stuff specifically. It complies, but to be able to get it is a whole nother thing because it doesn't happen much. And so the different Board of Elections are confused about what's required. Some places are easier to walk in and get it. But I just found it was most of the time it was easier just to try to send off for someone's birth certificate and figure a workaround for their social security card and get them an actual, Georgia State issued ID versus a ID from the Board of Elections. Also, we know people need IDs for other things, to get into shelters, food banks, et cetera. A lot of the access to resources requires an actual ID, and that Board of Elections ID, it doesn't get them access to those other services. So that's definitely a very valid point. But yes, it does comply if you're able to get it, and if your local board of elections knows what to do to to get it. And so I see we have another question in the chat.
Wait, before you go into that, first off, I want to say applaud you, Fallon. You've done so much. I forgot that you were doing that. You were getting people government issue IDs so they could vote before Senate Bill 202. And that's what typically happens with advocates who are really doing the work. They do the work before it's even required to do the work. So all the people that you actually did get photo IDs for, government issued IDs for, thank you for that, because that helps minimize the impact of 202. And it looks like you're going to be in demand again, because that's exactly what needs to happen. So let's circle up after this call to make sure that happens. Right. Let's go ahead, because you already have the blueprint. You were already doing a good job with it. Now we have to really go and jump in those communities again. I tell people all the time, I have a lot of job security, and when it comes down to it, because if you actually elected the right people who passed the right laws, I wouldn't have a job anymore, because our government would be running right instead of being discriminating or voter suppression government that we are. So Fallon and I are literally trying to put ourselves out of the job by doing this type of work. But it looks like we're going to have a job for a while.
It does, unfortunately. Which Nancy's question, I think, is a nice, good segue. She said, this is also the year for redistricting. With how petty the Georgia General Assembly was this session, what do you expect to happen with a redistricting, and how can we help the ACLU?
Nancy, that is such a great question, because you know what? I have no idea. I am a very transparent type of person. No idea. And you know what? I'm not the only one, because I've talked to Republicans. They have no idea either. Zero. Typically, real states, and I say real states for a reason, real states who actually take redistricting seriously have principles, standards, and guidelines that they go by of saying, this is how redistricting is going to go. So we're not going to, I was going to say screw over, so I'm being very relaxed. We're not going to disenfranchise certain types of people or do it in a certain way. At least you know the playbook, right? They're not even telling us the playbook of how they're going to make this thing happen. And the reason why I think they're not going to tell us the playbook, because they really don't know themselves. We know that redistricting is going to be horrible. That's what we do know. We know that after, if you thought Senate Bill 202 was bad, wait till redistricting happens and how they carve out these new districts altogether. It's going to be a problem that we're going to have to solve. And it's going to be a hard process. So gearing up, we already have a redistricting team. We've been working with other coalition groups to deal with redistricting too. But really, a lot of it has to deal with what's happening with Senate Bill 202, the same thing. We have to educate the populace on the redistricting process. Redistricting is not the simplest concept within itself. And there's a lot of nuances within it that really impact communities. You need to be aware, and so do your neighbors need to be aware about the redistricting process, if we knew what it was. And let your elected officials know what is right and what's wrong without the redistricting process. So we can't have elected officials picking their constituents. Constituents are the ones who need to be electing their elected officials or picking their elected officials. And that's what's happening with the redistricting process. So what can you do right now? I don't know. I'll have something for you in about a month. I'm just being completely honest with you, because we have no idea how it's going to go right now.
And every year we've tried to get a nonpartisan redistricting committee passed through the state house, where it, and it's something that doesn't go far or doesn't pass like every year. This is something we've been working on for years and years, especially knowing after 2020 a major census would come, and so it would be a big year for redistricting. Also, the previous administration has made it hard, because the numbers should have been out by now, but they're all delayed because of just sort of like the mismanagement of this, the even taking of the census has pushed everything behind. So like realistically, redistricting should have happened prior to these municipal elections and would have had but that's not going to happen. And so also, just on the other flip side of that, the problem with that is like, so now you have municipalities and folks getting elected potentially for another 4 years, and their districts have either ballooned or shrunk, and so they're not adequately representing the kind of sort of the generally equal amount of people that we like to do. So there's just all kinds of things going on with redistricting.
Let me add this too. I did get a guarantee that redistricting was not going to impact the municipal elections. But let me also add one thing. There's another omnibus bill. It's called Senate Bill 172, and it was passed in 2018, I think. And you know how you do redistricting, and it's really supposed to focus on your state representatives and your state senators and your congressmen. That's what it's supposed to be, right? Those three type aspects. Senate Bill 172, I think that was the right one, was a bill that was introduced that impacts your cities, your counties, and your public school board of elections. So they can redraw the lines of your city council people, your county commissioners, and your board of elections, basically any and everything within your life. And if you've seen anything within this, and I'll say this openly, you'll see from the state legislature, like you saw with Senate Bill 202, a state takeover of certain areas. These new cities that are trying to pop up, these are fiefdoms that they want to have because Democrats and Republicans have gone through this strife with each other. We've seen that Republicans are losing power, so they want to keep their power within these little fiefdoms of either cities, board of elections, or counties within itself. We have to stop that altogether. You can't just be able to carve out your own little area just because you may be losing an election. Be very careful on, we're talking about redistricting on a statewide level. You need to be talking about redistricting on your local level, which has the most impact on your life, as you've heard so many times before.
Okay, so we're running out of time, but we have two last questions in here. When will the legislature convene to begin redistricting? I think there will be a special session later on this year, right? And then also, I heard on a news program that the governor has until July to rescind his signature on Senate Bill 202 or any bill for that matter. Is that correct?
So I haven't heard anything about rescinding the bill. Again, the governor has 40 days, so probably within that 40-day window, he doesn't have to. July 1st is typically the day that all bills go into effect unless otherwise stated on that bill. So that may be true. I'll put 99.9% that the governor is not going to rescind the signature on Senate Bill 202. It'd be political suicide altogether. It'd be funny if he did though, which it's Georgia. You never know what's going to happen. And the legislature, from what I'm hearing about convening about redistricting, could be in late October, early November, which means we don't get a Thanksgiving break or anything else too for the third year in a row.
A very long legislative session because they would reconvene for the special session and then close that out and then start back again in January. So it would be like a 5-6 months legislative session, which is not something that we typically have here in Georgia. But that's a whole nother thing because, you know, having a part-time legislator in the way that we do and the way that they're paid, I think it definitely impacts the quality and the caliber of the folks that we can have. And I mean, it's just, you know, who can actually take the time off from work, and, you know, it makes it hard to have a legislator that's truly representative of, you know, the communities that they serve. So random 2 cents. Sorry, I won't go down the rabbit hole, but just to close out, thank you all for joining us this morning in our first discussion series. Like I said, this is a series. We will be having more on 429. It's all about defund and what does that really mean? Again, with Tiffany Roberts and Mariah Parker. And then in May, 2 weeks after that, we'll have one on immigration under the Biden administration and things about like the Irwin County Detention Center and stuff. And just because we have a president or you know, that we that is much better and is meeting some of our needs doesn't mean that we don't still hold them accountable on all the issues that are important to us. And so we'll have Susanna Duran from Poder Latinx and Fee Wynn from AAJ and some others on that. So just stay tuned for all of our next series. We hope you can join us again. And thank you so much, Chris, as always, for, you know, it's always a great time to share events with you and share space with you. It's always great and to catch up. And so just thank y'all and have a great it's morning and the rest of your day.
Hey, Sally. Hey, see you later. Y'all have a good one.
Bye.